No, Europe will not abandon the targets they have set. China, in a way, could be for us a carbon-neutral fitness club. If we, together with China, win for this one, we can actually then replicate it in other parts of the world.
Yes.
Can actually participate, or we can always say no to the US.
What are the most promising areas about China-EU green cooperations, and how to ensure the energy safety for both sides? And moreover, will Europe take sides between China and the United States? Today, we're so happy to invite Mr. Joerg Wuttke, the president of European Chamber in China, to analyze a little bit more about the behind-the-scenes secrets and the cooperation between China and Europe on green energy sector. Here are his thoughts, so please enjoy today's episode. Welcome to the show. Let's first take a look at some recent news in Europe about carbon neutrality. So Copenhagen gives up on its 2025 target, while Germany is revising its draft law on the same goal. Many think this measures as a signal that EU will abandon the carbon neutrality. Do you agree with it? And how will it impact the China-EU cooperation on the green energy sector?
No, Europe will not abandon the targets they have set. They have outlined already the plan how to do this. The money is there. The targets are very clear, but we have a clear-cut situation now that we have an energy crisis in Europe. So as you probably know, we have to restart a couple of coal-fired power stations. We're lacking gas and so forth. So in a way, we take a hit in our energy mix and in our energy goals. Basically, I think that Europe and China, in a situation of energy stress levels like that, can actually learn from each other by maintaining the carbon neutrality targets, but at the same time also trying to actually accommodate the economy because we can't live without energy.
You just mentioned energy shortage, especially during the summer, very hot summer we just went through. UK and France are restarting the coal-fired plant to restore the energy. It seems like we have to keep a balance between the short-term crisis with long-term strategy. How to keep a balance like that?
We have to see how we can stabilize it. Of course, we are desperately looking for new gas deliveries. Qatar comes to mind. And again, I mean, Germany has turned off its nuclear power stations, possibly too early. We are discussing the 3 remaining if we keep them running, which is politically very difficult. So there are all kinds of solutions in order to come up. In China, it's a bit different because China, of course, has no war at its borders. And China has a strong growth, and you need a stabilizing factor. And that's where technology comes in. And that's why I think the European Chamber members have a lot to offer. We also have to see that China stands for 25% of global emissions, as much as US, Japan and Europe together. So it's not just a great, huge market for us coming up. It's a great, huge task in order to tackle it together.
You've mentioned that China has the greatest carbon emissions, but we have to see there are 2 aspects, the historic aspects. Like throughout the history, the total volume of the carbon emissions, and also per capita, like the carbon emissions, we have to make it to per person.
In a way, we really have to see where we can cut through the learning curve that we had in the West by having China doing this with us together right now.
We are so happy to see that China and the EU not only share the responsibilities as great powers for our Mother Earth, but also those green energy has developed great industries for billions of dollars and lots of job opportunities for both countries. What are the most promising areas of green energy between China and the EU?
Well, it's manifold. First of all, before we look into energy generation, it's saving, it's insulation. It's detecting where you spend the most energy in industrial processes. Do you need the boiler? Do you have different drives? Do you have new technologies? And that's where China comes in, because China is also a growing market, unlike the European market. Yes. And so we can have factories, new factories, on a totally different scale and totally different concept than we built. It's far more difficult to retrofit an existing, for example, chemical site than to build a new one. And that's where China comes in. China, in a way, could be for us a carbon-neutral fitness club in order to test case new technologies. And again, so insulation, saving energy in processes, in production is one thing. And then, of course, you have to see how you can balance renewables with the energy demand. The problem is always the peak every day, 3 times a day. So energy storage is vital, absolutely vital. Normally you take mountains, pumped storage power stations, That's difficult if you don't have mountains or have no water like in northeast China. So you have to have batteries, energy batteries, and you have to find other mechanisms. And again, China is a huge market opportunity there in order to do these big-scaled energies, because they have the money and the technologies at hand and the engineers who can do it. So if we, together with China, win for this one, we can actually then replicate it in other parts of the world.
Yes. According to a neutrality report issued by European Chamber in China in April, I read through this. It mentioned that China faces two main challenges to achieve the dual carbon policy. The firstly, that the low proportion of the renewable energy in the energy structure in China, and secondly, how to reduce the industrial dependence on the cheap energy. So how can Europe and China cooperate on this sector to solve all of these main challenges that China is facing right now?
Now you have, of course, Europe already very much away from manufacturing into service sector. It's a totally different consumption profile. But I think we actually can showcase the transition from old industry, heavy polluting industries to service sector industries. We have done this in Germany, in the Ruhrgebiet, in the western part of Germany, which was coal-fired left and right. So in a way, and that's actually happening right now, is that Chinese decision makers look at that kind of transition period of how to do this. Now China is showcasing, of course, how everything can be done by digitalization, you know, artificial intelligence, the maintenance of plants, how to keep the grid coordinated. China is not there yet, but can be because they have a knack for this kind of software and hardware gadgets that we see. So in a way, the interconnectedness of the national grid is very vital, and we can actually test our new equipment, new systems in China, because that's where the biggest demand is. So in a way, it's great for business opportunities. China put a lot of resources behind NEVs. We benefit from this one, and then this engineering learning that we have here can spill over back home in our headquarters, and then can lead us to better products there. No, we benefit from more competition from Chinese companies selling cars into Europe. NEVs from China are primarily targeting Scandinavia right now, because they are nearly 80 or 100% of their cars, particularly Norway, on NEVs. So it's a fertile market, so to speak, before they go into more difficult markets like France and Italy and Germany, which are very settled in a way. Yeah. So in a way, it's learning on both sides.
So what sectors are especially worth invested for European companies in China, and also for China to invest in Europe?
We try to invest in areas where we can actually participate in industrial processes. That's many Central European companies in particular have very good strengths. That's where you can have the biggest saving, because industry is such a big demand story when it comes to energy. And again, of course, we showcase how we can operate at a lower emission and lower energy intensity by having this. It has been studied, it has been incorporated by some companies, but of course it's a painful transition, because it means a lot of investment into technologies in China. But also now we can see, for example, CATL investing big time in East Germany, and an even bigger project in Hungary, that they are going into the battery business, meaning helping Europe in order to have the most competitive batteries for new energy vehicles. That's of course a huge success story.
So let's move forward to some energy safety issues. There's another statistics that the United States currently accounts for nearly half of Europe's LNG imports, about twice that of 2021. So is Europe now seeking for more diverse sources of energy?
Well, we're desperate to find new sources. I mean, we have our ministers and our government leaders going to Africa, Middle East, even more faraway countries. And of course, the US is first and foremost on our mind, because they have such an excess of gas and oil available due to the energy revolution they went through. Of course, we're looking for new sources. So now it takes time. It takes 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, or 5 years in order to get the supplies up again. And they're trying very hard to get this, particularly also from North Africa, from the Mediterranean, even from Egypt. So in a way, but at the same time, what we are learning now is that we have to decarbonize our industrial processes, and we have to just teach our people to lose less energy. So maybe we don't waste a crisis by actually turning it to an opportunity. Of having a different lifestyle and different way of how we do things. I'm very sure that we come out of this. quite well, better, I guess. But the next 2 or 3 years might be very difficult, and the winter's coming.
So will it make it more difficult for Europe to say no to United States?
Oh, we can always say no to the US. We have done it many, many times, particularly during the Trump administration. We said no to the US when we signed the investment agreement. We said no to the US when they didn't like us to say geographic indicator. I think there's a misconception in China that we always say yes to the US. That's not the case. We are first and foremost looking after our own interests. Of course, the US is a big ally of us. It's a big supporter in many ways. Security as well as in energy, and it's a huge market for us, much, much bigger than the Chinese market. So we are always, of course, aligning ourselves with our friends and allies, but there are sometimes disagreements, and so no problem of saying no once in a while.
You know, recently there are some concerns because earlier this year, EU suspended the EU-China investment agreement, and raising concerns of decoupling of China-EU relations. And you once said, let me quote, "Those who withdraw from the Chinese market are hurting themselves." What are the present and future costs of decoupling of the two powers, and will this happen in the future?
Well, on the investment agreement, I think it's pretty much in the freezer. It will not come out for quite a while. When it comes to decoupling would be damaging to both parties. The Chamber came out with a paper last year indicating that decoupling would have real problems for European business, particularly the top 10 European business companies, but also for China, of course. And decoupling, of course, would be very harmful for the Chinese economy because they are selling by now nearly 1.5 billion euro every day in goods to Europe. So if Europe would decouple and say we don't like Chinese goods anymore, that would cause shockwaves in the employment here. We are selling about now, unfortunately, less than last year, 500 million every day. So of course for us also the Chinese market is very important. But again, as a market, Europe matters more at this stage. I mean, it's great to see that Europeans love Chinese furniture, electronics, toys and car components and so forth. Decoupling would be bad for the consumer, and I hope that we don't get there.
We have the carbon tax on the borders issued by EU. So
well, there is. I mean, as you know, there's a very high carbon tax in Europe. It's 10 times more than it is in China. So there is, of course, the attempt, if the taxation on carbon emissions is so high in Europe, then of course we call it about carbon leakage, meaning companies moving out into areas where there's less carbon tax or cheaper carbon tax. And politicians want to counter that, to make it a more balanced, level playing field market. But of course that's very tricky because it means taxation, it means borders, it means an authorization coming from an administration which has to be established. And I think the most important there is that it is WTO compliant. So in a way, I guess that we have to really see that we knock down borders and not just raise more hurdles.
You have two different perspectives. Apart from being the president of European Chamber in China, you're also the president of BASF, one of the biggest chemical companies in the world. What changes have you been witnessed and experienced? Is it difficult to carry out the policy from an enterprise perspective?
The chemical sector is interesting because it stands for 50% of global production. So if you want to change something in processes in chemistry, which is hugely energy intensive, you have to do it here. I give an example. My headquarters back home in Germany, the energy consumption equals the energy consumption of Denmark. The gas consumption that we have there equals the gas consumption of Switzerland. So if you do a little bit there, you have major savings already. And we have the biggest projects here in China. I mean, honestly, when I came 40 years ago, when I look at my old pictures, always blue sky, you know. Then we had this period of time in China until 2015, 16, 17, where it was really gray every day. No summer was blue sky. I'm absolutely amazed about how fast the country could actually go from coal to gas, get rid of these industrial boilers around Beijing. So the way, personally speaking, just witnessing the kind of speed in how to actually, again, get to the sky from 1982 is just mind-blowing. So in a way, definitely, we enjoy that kind of transition. I never thought it's going to happen that fast. And again, that gives you sometimes the confidence that big challenges can be tackled faster and better than we all anticipate.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.